So what I'm going to do now is talk you through a newspaper article highlighting the key features, and then I'll explain what you need to do to write a newspaper article in the functional English exam. So this newspaper article has got a headline. Withenshaw MP explains why he abstained in welfare vote. It's got a byline of the person who wrote the article. It's got an image or a picture. There's a caption underneath the picture. The first sentence introduces what the rest of the article is about. This is called a strap line. It's really just an introductory sentence. The article's been split into paragraphs, and the paragraphs have been made by missing a line, so it's really clear where each paragraph begins. There's quotes in the article, so these are quotes from Mike Kane, things that he's actually said. And there's a final sentence which is a conclusion. It sums up the article. So when you're writing your newspaper article for the functional English exam, you do need to use a headline. In newspapers you often see headlines which have alliteration in it, so those are words that begin with the same letter. For example, Magical Murray, when it was talking about Andy Murray winning a Wimbledon title. You sometimes see headlines which have wordplay in them, such as Drip Drip Hooray, when it was the Queen's Golden Jubilee. When you're doing your headline for the functional English exam, I wouldn't worry too much about using alliteration or wordplay. So long as your headline sums up what the article's about, that's the main thing that you need to be concerned about. If you want to know more about alliteration or wordplay, it will be covered in the reading unit that deals with language and layout techniques, so we'll look more at that then. Your article needs to say who it's by, so you can make up a name by a reporter, that's a made up name, or you can use your own name, that's absolutely fine. There's an image on this article. Unless you feel strongly about it, I personally wouldn't use an image on your own newspaper article. It's going to be too difficult to draw a picture. If you do choose to use an image, maybe just putting a text box with image written in it, then do use a caption as well to tell you what the image is about. That's a feature of a newspaper article. I would expect you to use a strapline, so have an introductory sentence which tells you what the rest of the article is about. Withenshaw MP Mike Kane has explained why he abstained in the vote on the government's welfare reform and work bill, which will impose a £20,000 a year benefit cap on families. That completely sums up what the rest of the article is about, and it's a typical feature of a newspaper article which should be relatively easy to do in your own work, so I would recommend that you do that. This article has got clear paragraphs with a line missing. I'd recommend that you miss a line between your paragraphs to make it really clear where your paragraphs begin and where they end. This article has got quotes from one of the main people in the story. So the story is about Mike Kane, and there is a quote from Mike Kane here. At level 1, you won't get penalised if you use speech marks incorrectly, because they're actually a level 2 piece of punctuation. At level 2, you are expected to use speech marks correctly. So I recommend that if you're not sure how to do that, that you look at the second of the punctuation units, the unit focusing on the level 2 punctuation. This article is an informative article. There are lots of facts. The bill was opposed by 48 Labour MPs. Mr Kane voted for a Labour bid to halt the bill. There's two main types of newspaper articles. This is an informative one, which is full of facts. I would expect an informative article to have a look at both sides of the story. You might also be asked to write a persuasive article in the functional English exam. Say, for instance, an article asking people to support you in providing some activities for young teenagers to do in your area, something like that. That kind of article, it's perfectly acceptable to be quite biased and to be one-sided. In the reading units, we are going to look more about bias and balance and looking at both sides of an argument. There's two more things that you need to know. You might notice that when you're looking at newspaper articles in a newspaper, the writing is divided into columns. It's your choice whether or not you use columns in the writing that you do for the functional English exam. I personally think that it's more straightforward not to use columns. Sometimes it can get a bit confusing, and if you need to add any extra information, it can sometimes not be that easy to do if you've used columns. But if you want to use columns to make it look like a newspaper, that's absolutely fine. And the final thing you might need to know is, occasionally on the functional English exams, they ask you to write an article for a newsletter as opposed to a newspaper. And really the main difference between a newspaper and a newsletter is that a newsletter has a smaller readership. A newspaper might be read by a whole area of people. For instance, the Wythenshawe Reporter might be read by the whole of the population of Wythenshawe, whereas the Learner Voice newsletter that we publish within Maze is read just by learners in Maze. So it could be that a newsletter might be slightly more informal than a newspaper, but really there's not that great a difference between the article that you would write for each.